We're going to talk about standard deviation in section 11 in your textbook, Making Sense of Statistics. So standard deviation is the most frequently used measure of variability. Now, in the previous section, you learned that the term variability refers to differences among participants. Synonyms for variability are also known as the spread and dispersion. So so the variability are also spread and dispersion. So standard deviation is a statistic that provides an overall measurement of how much participants' scores differ from the mean score of their group. And it is also a special type of average of the deviations of the scores from their mean. Now, on Appendix A, near the end of the book, you can see how to compute the standard deviation. So you can learn what is meant by a special type of average of the deviation if you go to Appendix A, but we are not going to do that in this presentation. Now, let's look at the scores for example 1 and the scores in example 2. So let's compare these two groups. Note that the capital S italicized is the symbol for the standard deviation, and the mean is the same for both groups. So if you see the mean for group A is a 10.00 and the mean for group B is a 10.00. But group A has the greater variability among the scores. So if you look at the standard deviation, you see that the standard deviation is a 7.45. Where if you look at the scores for group B, their standard deviation is a 1.40. So group A clearly has the larger standard deviation and thus a greater variability. So let's look now at example number 3. If you see the scores for group C, clearly our mean again is a 10.00, and you can see that all of the scores for group C are a 10. So now there is no variability, so there is no standard deviation. So we have no standard deviation with no variability. So the standard deviations equals 0. Let's look at, we've got all three groups. We have group A, group B, and group C. Now if you look, here's what we can say about the groups. So if you notice, each group has a mean of 10. Each group has a mean of 10. And group A, we can see, based on their standard deviation, we just look at their standard deviations now. Group A has more variability than group B or C. So we can see that each of the groups have a mean of 10, but that group A with a standard deviation of 7.45 has more variability than group B or C. Then if we look at group B, we see that the standard deviation for group B is a 1.40, which means that group B has more variability than group C. Now, we also can say that group C has no variability, as the standard deviation is a 0.00. Now, let's think about the standard deviation and the normal curve. So, if you can remember anything about the standard deviation and the normal, so here we see a normal curve with a standard deviation of 10. If you see, our mean is a 70, so our one standard deviation unit is 10 points on either side of the mean. So if you look, this means 68%, which is a little more than 2/3 of the cases lie within 10 points of the mean. So now if you look closer, you can see that 34% of the cases lie between a score of 60 and a mean of 70. And that's within one standard deviation unit below the mean. Now if we go from 70 to 80, we can look at also 34% of the cases lie between the mean of 70 and the score of 80. So that also is one standard deviation above the mean. So if we look within both of the between 60 and 80, we have 68% of a standard deviation within one standard deviation unit of the mean. So that is 68% of the cases do lie within one standard deviation unit of the mean in a normal distribution. Also, again, remember, within one standard deviation means one unit on both sides of the mean. Curve with a standard deviation of 5. So now the 68% rule applies to all normal cases. So this is a property of the normal curve, that 68% of the cases lie in the middle area, which are bounded by one standard deviation on each side. So now we could also say, let's look at that for this other group. One standard deviation, the mean is a 70, but the standard deviation is only 5, and this is illustrated in figure 11.2. So the group has less variability within the standard deviation of only 5. However, you still see that 68% of the cases still lie in the middle area of the distribution. But because the standard deviation is only 5 points, 68% of the cases lie between the scores of 65 and 75 for this group of participants. Now, let's look at example 4 on page 51. Now, example 4 shows a sentence in which both the means and standard deviations are reported. Now, we can see, if we looked back in Appendix A, we could see the calculation of the standard deviation is based on the differences between the mean of each of the scores in the distribution, and the standard deviation can be thought of as the first cousin of the mean. But as a result of this, researchers report the mean, which is the most frequently used average. They also usually report the standard deviation immediately after reporting the mean. So if we are looking at reading a journal and we see a sample statement that states the mean and their standard deviation, we could write if group A has a higher mean, you see the mean is 67.89 with a standard deviation of 8.77 than group B. Now see that the mean is lower than, for group B, is lower than group A. We have a mean of 60.23, and we're also reporting a standard deviation of 8.54. So anytime we are reporting the mean, we are also reporting the standard deviation. We also then know that that group A has greater variability than group B. So this concludes our lecture for section 11, standard deviation in making sense